Welcome back to my channel. Today's video will be super exciting. We'll be talking about how to get clean and fast renders. I'll be talking about how to denoise images using Arnold's noise denoiser, how to optimize your scenes to get the most efficient render times, and also we will be talking about how to use Nuke, a compositing software, to actually denoise your images. And we'll be comparing all the results to find the best result for you, which makes your renders the most beautiful and pretty ones. But before we get our hands dirty, I first of all want to thank the sponsor of today's video, which is Autodesk, a huge software company responsible for several DCCs including 3ds Max, AutoCAD, and also Autodesk Maya, which we'll be using today. Maya is used in almost every studio. It's used for gaming, it's used for animation, it's used for visual effects, for everything. It's quite amazing. I'll be using this for look dev and lighting using Arnold's render engine. So let's just get into it and get going with the optimizing unit. Alright, as you can see, we are back in Maya with a quite interesting scene, nice lighting moods and a different kind of approach this time. First of all, I want to thank Johnny FEHR, who actually provided me this scene. He's a quite talented artist. You can check it out on ArtStation. He's got very nice work. He also has like grunge maps, which you can buy. Also, there's a link for that in the description below. He's got nice renders. This is actually the render he did, which is, I think, a lot nicer than what I came up with. And he's also on Instagram. Check him out, Johnny FEHR. Quite a talented artist, and it's great to have him here. And also, he's quite active on my Discord community. Make sure to join it as well. The link is in the description too. And so let's jump back into the scene. We have a quite basic setup. We've got 2 lights or 3 maybe, and then it's mainly driven by render settings. And the first thing we want to do is talk about render settings. The defaults are 3222 if you install a new Arnold version, and this is the default settings you get. And the render with those default settings looks like this. You can see we have a little bit of noise here and there, but all in all, it's quite clean. The render settings, the render times for this are roughly a minute on my machine here. This is full 1080p. And then you obviously want to optimize this, and it's very important to keep your render times small and your image quality high. And so there needs to be some kind of optimization being done here. And quite important is obviously the AA samples. 3222 is a quite good low settings, but for me, I have it actually way low. I have it on 211, and I also make sure my ray depth is as 1 as well. That way we do not have any additional bounces. And with these render settings, the result will essentially look like this. It's a bit more noisy, but the render here now is like 8 seconds. And if I actually hit render now, you can see now we have a very fast interactive scene. I can switch my camera to perspective. And you can see now if I toggle around, everything is nice and fast, and it's quite fun to work like that. And that's something which you guys should do as well. If you do lighting or look dev, make sure your scenes are fast so you can have way more iterations. And this is something I do all the time. So the next step is, how would you actually get cleaner renders? So one obviously would be to increase your AA samples and make it look great. What I've seen quite often, those render settings which are through the roof. I've seen settings not 100 but 10 10 10, and this is if people don't really know what to set, and they just think, okay, 10 10 10 is good, maybe it's similar in different DCCs, but essentially these settings are extremely high and very oversampled, because AA samples are multiplied by itself. So it's 100 samples, and then it's multiplied with diffuse, specular, and transmissive, which are also multiplied by itself. So you've got quite a few samples. This is 100 times 100, which is 10,000 samples for indirect diffuse, which is way too high. Good render settings, for instance, would be if it would be a 10-1-1 scenario. This would be great for motion blur, and this will actually get quite good results for you as well. So what I want to do in this video today is I want to show you guys how to set up your scene so it's the most efficient as possible. This is applicable to pretty much any render engine which uses a PBR workflow. So they all have samples, and it's quite similar to most of them, especially I'm talking about V-Ray and render, quite similar approaches. So what I want to do here, I want to optimize this shot here. So I want to essentially render this with 2111 and just see how things going. If I look through my render camera here, and this is what we have. And obviously you can see we have noise, but one thing which I see quite often happening is now you get the noise here, especially in the shadows. People will just push your AA samples until it's clean. This is the first approach, but most of the time for shadow samples, the reasons are different. So if you stay at 2-1-1, you can see that we're back with the noise here. But now let's find the light, which is actually this one here, which is causing this shadow. So it's quite important to set your light samples as well. Like if I would put like 3 samples for this light here, you can already see it's dramatically better. It's a lot cleaner from 1, which is the default, to 2 or to even 3 makes a huge difference. So I always encourage you guys to set your light samples to 2, but obviously test it out. Don't just set everything to 2. Make sure there's actually a visual difference. And then the cool thing is you don't need to crank your A samples up as much anymore. For instance, you can see this is the diffuse indirect. You can now lift the diffuse and it gets even cleaner. So you don't need to go always all the time with your A samples. And then another important thing is the ray depth. You do want to increase it, but you don't want to go too crazy. It's mainly interesting for interior scenes where you have more light bouncing around. And when you see a difference from changing it from 1 to 2 depth, and you see the brightness, it gets brighter. That's a good thing, right? So you want to keep pushing that. But at a certain level, mainly around 3 to 4 ray depth, you don't see visually any big difference anymore. And that's a time when you should stick with the lower one. So there's a small difference from 3 to 4, just stick with 3 because it's good enough. And the same with specular. Specular though is mainly a lot lower than that. So keep in mind, for this exterior shot, I don't care much about bounces. I don't have any bright objects which I want to cast light. So I keep it at 1, which is very efficient. So that's also something which you need to adjust accordingly. So in today's video, I rendered different samples and different versions. So I have a 2111, I have a 422, and I have a 10:1, I believe. So this is now my render settings with 2111, and this is a 6 seconds render. Then I have the 4222, which is already cleaner, which is a, what was it? I think it was around 50 seconds render. And then we do have the 10:1, which for me I find is my ground truth, which is the cleanest render which I'm producing, and this took around 4 minutes to render. So that's the difference, right? A super clean render looks great, but 4 minutes, or a very low sample render which takes 6 or 8 seconds to render, but it's noisy, right? So now the reason for this video is I want to show you guys how you can make clean renders with the fastest render times. And we will be doing some denoising, we will be doing some nuke denoising, we will be doing some topaz denoising, and obviously we will be using Arnold's denoiser as well. So for the denoising part, it's actually not that difficult. Lots of people ask me how to do this, and all you have to do essentially is go to your render settings, go to AOVs tab. It's quite similar with all the other Arnold DCCs. You just go to the denoising tab, make actually sure that your output denoising AOVs are turned on. And I'm not talking about optics denoiser. Optics is just for the interactive scene, the current render, just to have a nicer, smoother first pixel, essentially. But for final renders, you want to use the Arnold's denoiser, which is internally called noise. And you do want to output NZ and albedo, which is helping the denoiser to get even better results. So make sure you output NZ and albedo, and also make sure that the output denoising AOVs is on, which is essentially a variance AOV. And then in your comment tab, make sure that merge AOVs is on and preserve layer name. That just helps the denoiser find the correct paths, and it will denoise actually. All right, so that's all you have to do to set it up, but it's a post render essentially. So you have to go to Arnold menu, go to utilities, Arnold denoiser, find your rendered frame. So you obviously do first your original render, plug it in here. It will automatically append denoised, which will be your new output path. And then you've got a few settings. One is render, like the frame range. And then you have temporal stability frames, which means how many frames before and after the current frame should the denoiser look at to get a cleaner result. It's a good range between 2 and 5. The more you add, the longer it will take for your to denoise. So I found good results with 2. I also found better results with 3 to 4. But again, it's up to you. Variance essentially is just the strength of how strong the denoise is. Lower values are more noisy, higher values are smoother, but you lose the detail. So you got to test it out with your specific shots. Pixel search radius and pixel patch radius are quite similar. Pixel search radius means from the current pixel, look 9 pixels around yourself and denoise that area. And the patch radius will look for 3 different patches in that current radius and see in the other temporal frames which one is the clean, and just combine. Light group AOVs enables you to denoise light AUV. Essentially, if you have your key light separated, your rim light separated, they can be denoised too. But this is not actually denoising your AUVs or specular or diffuse passes. So this is not what it's for. But essentially, all you got to do, hit denoise, and noise does the work. It takes around 50 to seconds to 1 minute on my machine. So I did a little case study with 3 different render settings. One was 2111, 4222, and 1021. And then denoised all of them. And now it's time to compare them and see actually what the results are. All right, here we are in Nuke now, and you can see now we do have our renders, and this is essentially the raw render we had before. You can see it's quite noisy. Then we have the 422, and then we have the 10-to-1-1, and this is the cleanest I rendered out. It takes like 6 seconds, 50 seconds, and then 4 minutes or something like that. So that's actually 74 seconds for this frame. And now let's look at the denoise results, right? So each of them I ran with the same denoise settings. And this is now for the 2111 denoise settings. So you can see it's still quite noisy. This is before, this is after. It loses a bit of intensity, but you can see it's definitely cleaner, but you can see it's like floppy and all that. Then for the 422 difference is, so this is the raw render. See, it's noisy here in the shadow area. But now if I switch the denoiser, you can already see now this already looks nice and clean now. You can see there's still some little bit of flickering going on in these areas here, but it's quite clean already. And for the ground truth, which is a 10-to-1, you can see the raw is quite clean already. With the denoiser, it's just a very smooth result, right? But this essentially takes the longest to compute. And then also I did a secondary approach. I used NEATVIDEO, which is an industry standard denoising tool, which is mainly used for plates, but I use NEATVIDEO also for that digital cleanup. Right, so this here now is with the NEATVIDEO on top. So this is the raw render, and this is now with Nukes or with the plugin NEATVIDEO. And if you actually want to check it out, NEATVIDEO, I do have a affiliate link in the description below if you want to check it out and download that as well. It's very powerful. I will go quickly into the settings so you can see how powerful it is. And again, this is now a 6 or 7 second render, and this is now denoised in Nuke, and you can see it's almost instantaneous. So this is already a very surprising result. I did not expect that, especially comparing NEATVIDEO, which is Nuke's denoise or a plugin for Nuke, and then comparing that with noise. And you can see this is the noise denoiser, and you can see on the stairs it's quite flickery actually. But then with NEATVIDEO, it's quite clean already. Very interesting. All right, so now let's quickly look how I set up the NEATVIDEO, because it's actually quite simple. I do have it here. Reduce noise is what it's called, and I'll just plug that directly into my raw render. So this is the raw render. Here's the NEATVIDEO. Double click that, go to prepare noise profile. And you have to do that just to get things started. So essentially what you do is, again, I'm not a compositor, but I find my way around things. So I just hit generic profile, and then you pick an area where you see lots of uniform noise, right? All right, so then you have the option to use the generic noise to adjust the noise levels. I just do it until I see a quite smooth result here on the left. And then I play around with the luminance until I get less noise in the brighter areas. This is setting up your base profile. And then you jump over to the next tab here, adjust and preview. You can already see now, if I zoom in here a little, this is already a very satisfying result here. You can see if I click before and after, like most of the noise is already gone. So one thing to do is you can adjust the temporal radius, and this is essentially how many frames are being looked at for denoising. So I'll just crank it up all the way to 5, which gives it takes longer, but it gives you a cleaner result. And then you can clean up the noise itself. So let's see, we want to get rid of this jumping noise here, which is quite apparent below in this area. You can just increase the noise levels, and you can see now this really cleans it up. You can use repeated frames if you have similar noise patterns from frame to frame, which we actually do. So this might help as well to get rid of some noise. You can see it gets nice and clean now. If I hit play, this noise which we had before is essentially vanished, right? So before and after, right? It's a big deal, and it's very impressive. how clean this actually is. You can change the quality mode to high, which I just did because I have a strong GPU here, and it just does it essentially on the fly. And then I just hit apply. If I stop to the original exposure values now, you can see we have a very clean image here. And this is, again, from this render to this here with NEATVIDEO. It's super impressive. Again, from this render to the noise, also very impressive. So both are actually equally, not equally good, but very good. Like for a 6-second render plus denoise, it's very cool. The next step is the 422. Obviously now it gets better and better. So the raw render gets better, and then NEATVIDEO does a better job, and your noise does a better job as well. So this is the raw render. This is with NEATVIDEO on top. You can still see we've got a little bit of flickering, and then this is the noise one, which I find is better than NEATVIDEO. So this is now with 422. It's a bit tricky to decide. But then we have 10:1, which is our ground truth, plus denoise, plus NEATVIDEO on top. There's just no noise left. It's just the cleanest render I've ever seen. And then you have the noise version, which is also extremely clean. Just to top it all off, I also did a Topaz Gigapan denoiser, which is this one. It does not have temporal stability. So that's how it looks without it. You can see it's quite jittery. It's not the best result. So I would not recommend this for CGI or for videos in general. Great for stills, but not for video. All right, so let's recap what we did. We rendered 3 images with different sample settings. We went into Arnold's denoiser, set up a few parameters, and denoised those 3 renders as well. So essentially we got 6 image sequences. And then we went into Nuke and we did some other denoising as well. So we used NEATVIDEO, which is a plugin. The affiliate link is in the description below if you want to check that out. And then I also used Topaz for the free trial for denoising the image. And then we just compared all the results. And the results were super interesting, to be honest with you. So the results speak pretty much for themselves. Like the highest quality you get with the highest render settings, they take the longest, right? But it's a pretty image. But then you also get the lower end of the spectrum is low render settings, fast render times, and we need to find the nice balance in between. And the results I got were quite interesting for the sense that if you want to have fast renders, go low on the AA samples and get very noisy images, but make sure you don't have fireflies and stuff like that. And then you should do either Arnold's denoiser noise to get clean images, or you go into a third party, which is Nuke and NEATVIDEO, to clean up your renders. And the results I found was super interesting. NEATVIDEO performed extremely well, especially on the temporal noise. I was really impressed by that, and I think I will be using that in future. For Arnold's noise denoiser, it's also very impressive. From that really low noisy image, it got a quite clean result. And it was not as good as NEATVIDEO, but it was pretty close to it. And for the middle ground, I would recommend, if you want to go for really good quality images, I would recommend probably going into a low to mid range sample settings for rendering, picking that off, making sure you don't have fireflies because they are very hard to get rid of. And then with that image, you go into denoising. You either do a denoise with Arnold. It takes longer though. It takes like 50 seconds to like roughly 80 seconds per frame to denoise one image, depending on the temporal stability. Or you just completely use NEATVIDEO or any other denoising in application. And the speed gain you get is quite impressive. So NEATVIDEO is roughly, it's almost instant, right? It's like 40 frames per second. At least that's with my configuration. So my conclusion would be try to get a mid-range render settings and denoise it, either noise with Arnold or a NEATVIDEO. These are the most impressive results I've seen so far. I hope this video was interesting for you. This was something very different. And again, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, which was Autodesk Maya. Much appreciated for all the support on this platform here. And then also check out Johnny Fair, who provided me the scene. The link is in the description below. And also if you want to check out NEATVIDEO, do your own test, it's also, the affiliate link is in the description below. And if you want to check out the scene files, if you want to check out the rendered results I got and do your own comparisons, all the source files, all the denoise files are all uploaded to my Dropbox. So be sure to check it out if you want to do so. It's available on my Patreon with the link again in the description below. So thanks everyone for your support. I really appreciate it. And I hope you enjoyed this kind of video. See you in the next.